Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to today's Join the Curator program. I am Carol Ha, Associate Curator of Contemporary Asian Art at the Freer and Sackler, the Smithsonian's National Museum of Asian Art. Today, we travel to Tehran, to the studio of Nazgol Ansarinia. Nazgol graduated from the London College of Communication in 2001. After earning her Master of Fine Arts degree at the California College of the Arts in San Francisco, she returned to Tehran, where she currently lives and works. She has participated in residencies in Italy and Norway and exhibited her work worldwide, from Vancouver to Venice to Istanbul. Using a variety of media, Nazgol centers her practice on research and giving form to the complex realities of life in her home city. We will start the program with a presentation by Nazgol. That will be followed by a brief discussion, and I encourage all of you to submit your questions. Nazgol, I turn it over to you. Welcome.
Hello, everybody. First of all, thank you, Carol and the Smithsonian for the invitation. I'm happy to be speaking to you from Tehran this evening. Just a little note, today is a festival in Iran, and there is a lot of sort of sounds of explosions going in the background. So I apologize for any interruption. To prepare for today's presentation, I went back to review a few of the other Zoom talks I had given in the past year. Two in particular caught my attention. The first was 3 months into the pandemic, and the second one 7. In both, I start with describing the situation of being fixed in one place, and that will be my home/studio. My feelings clearly change from enjoying the uninterrupted solitude in the first presentation to a desperate need for getting out by imagining other places and spaces and conceiving that through my work. In the second presentation, and then later on, my sentiments changed once again when I finally was able to leave Tehran for a break. But I dreamt and longed to be back in this space every day. So now, 12 months after the pandemic broke in Iran, I'm exactly where I started, with some new baking skills, some antibodies, and a new understanding of space. Over the years, I've explored the relationship between the built environment and the social and economic currents through various projects, focusing mostly on the public space in Tehran. But in a turning point, my attention came to the relationship between the physical and the mental space. This turning point came with my decision to move into my current home studio. And with that introduction, I would like to tell you the story and to take you on a little tour. So if you can please play the video.
About 4 years ago, I decided to move from my apartment in North Tehran to the center of the city. This move literally changed my perspective as I moved from 5,900 feet altitude, overlooking the city, down to 4,000 feet and into a self-standing courtyard house with pretty much no view other than onto itself. To find this house, I searched for many months, during which I got to look inside many houses and therefore entered the personal space of many strangers. This experience made me more aware and interested in the relationship between one's mental space and its reflection in one's living space. My search came to an end when I found this 70-year-old small brick building. Not so many old houses are left in Tehran, and especially a courtyard house of this size is rather unique. Abandoned and dilapidated, it needed a lot of work, and so I entered a challenging process of renovation, which took a real toll on me. What gave me comfort during this long process and doubts about whether I had made the right decision or not was finding an overlap between two maps, a physical and a mental. One of the features of the courtyard houses is that all the windows look towards the central courtyard, as opposed to looking outside. So this structure was already a closed container when I found it. But once the architect sent me the architectural drawings for the renovation, I couldn't help but see an image of an upside-down swimming pool. Pools of water have a great significance in Iranian culture, but for me personally, they're also associated with the most pleasant memories of my childhood at my grandparents'. Thinking about one's living space as a container that holds one's thoughts, dreams, and reveries led me to develop the site-specific work titled The Inverted Pool at Argo Factory in 2020. This work is a 50% negative replica of my current house. So let's now come out of the pool and enter the real house. Half of this house is designated to living and the other half to work. That is, if these two can really be separated. This is my studio where I do all the planning, writing, and work on anything digital based. And here's the little courtyard that everything revolves around. And one level down is my workshop. All the making happens here, and I see it as a laboratory for experimentation with all sorts of materials and techniques. Apart from materials and tools, I also keep some leftover bits and pieces from various projects here. These are some wax models, 3D prints, and the inner structure of one piece from the series called Pillars. And here's a small collection of rubble from the demolition site I filmed for the project Demolishing Buildings, Buying Waste. These are the 3D printed prototypes which I use for casting the plaster pieces for the installation mechanisms of growth. And these broken or rather cut plates are some leftover pieces from the series mendings. And here I have some shards of mirror from some initial tryouts I did for the project Reflections, Refractions. I ended up not using this method and made the final works by cutting newspaper in the same geometric shapes. And on this side are the models and the molds and some color tests for my most recent work called Pools and Voids. These pieces from the process of past works are very important to me, in a way more valuable than the finished works themselves. I return to these as references, as each of them show a step in the imagination and realization of something new. So let's go back up as I will talk more in detail about some of the projects.
So the three projects I would like to share with you today all revolve around space and its reciprocal relationship to the socio-political and economic events. Tehran in the last 12 years has been on a fast-paced process of demolition and construction, Most of the new buildings are filling the space of what was there before, and they contain within their existence the annihilation of the existed. This transformation is driven by an economic force and revolves around the multiplication of property by building a few stories higher, resulting not only in the rapid change of the cityscape, but also in the lifestyle of its inhabitants. This powerful wave forcefully or voluntarily relocates people and vacates buildings so that they can be demolished, then replaced, throwing everything in a cycle of accumulation and obliteration. The demolitions are heard, but they're not seen so much, as they happen behind closed doors. And in this case, in the front, behind the front facade of the building. So I thought, in order to understand the mechanisms of this cycle, the first step was to see it in real. And after many months of search, I found a site that would allow me to be present during its demolition process. This building was a 30-year-old two-story building with two residential units, which was going to be replaced by a three-story building with 6 units. So over the course of 16 days, I documented in film and photographs a complete process of demolition. In Iran, the whole process of demolition is done manually, and as the building was being taken apart bit by bit, with the sheer force of hand and simple tools, how and what the building was made of was also revealed to me. So we can say that I became witness to what is called reverse engineering in industrial design terms. The process of which is the process of taking an object apart in order to understand how it was made. These are some scenes from the destruction. Based on my documentation, I redrew the demolished building in 3D and demolished it again virtually, simulating the techniques used by the workers. And using the tools of architecture became my method of investigating demolition. Coming back to the main question of project, which was whether the city was under construction or in destruction, I wanted to capture a moment in the cycle, which its direction was unclear, whether the city was being constructed or whether it was being destructed. And so I became interested in the relationship between building materials and rubble, and the moment the first becomes the last. I started to draw various parts of the building or the sort of various elements that the building was made of. And I applied the same method of demolition to each of these materials. This method allowed me to study the steps in a fragmentation of the building material. So basically going from building material to rubber. I applied this to all of the materials, and once this was done, with these fragments, I was able to create, in a way, fake piles of rubble. So in the installation, the mechanisms of growth, which is made out of these fake rubble, the pieces are displayed as specimen or excavated pieces from an archaeological site waiting to be reorganized and put back together. And in fact, it's possible to do so since there are no physical breaking in the creation of these fragments. There are also no missing parts, and everything can be put back together, bringing the process into a full cycle of demolition and construction. So while all the new construction has added to the overall height of the city has also been growing in length and width, spreading all the way to the mountains in the north and in the desert to the south, bulldozing over much of its natural beauty and blocking its own view. The municipality of Tehran has gained much profit from the construction boom through issuing permits and has played a big role in the transformation of the city. But to compensate for the loss of the open and green spaces, the municipality has been covering the side of the buildings with murals of gardens with blue sky, all Iranian architecture with a nostalgic air and scenes from nature. Many of these murals create optical illusions to transfer the citizens not only in space, but in time, sometimes to simpler village life or to the grandiosity of the olden times. These fantastical images of the past cover our modern and actual urban life, and they project the supposedly desired onto the undesired. The play with perspective and the use of already existing architectural elements of the buildings onto which these murals are painted suggests a merging of the real and the unreal architectural structures. Giving some form of reality to the painted spaces by making the two-dimensional three-dimensional in the project fabrications, both buildings, the actual and the illusionary, are made onto a merged architectural model. The real and the unreal are given the same amount of importance and the same circumstances to fight for existence. The process of merging of the two creates opportunities for such decisions as to how each building occupies its own space whilst interrupting the independence, values, and the functions of the other. And while each era has produced its own specific architecture reflecting the ethics of its ruling power, this project attempts to capture the ephemeral nature. So while each era has produced its own specific architecture reflecting the ethics of ruling power, this project attempts to capture the ephemeral nature of these murals and free them to become the representations of this era. And examining these murals not only as a fast solution to a big problem by tampering with collective memory to produce popular aesthetics, but also as a representative of an unsettled battle between tradition and modernism. Another spatial battle tied to the social and political currents of our time is not symbolized in the newly erected structures, but this time it can be found in the existence of persistent voids, the empty swimming pools of Tehran. And viewing one of the middle-class neighborhoods like Jordan from a higher position, the number of empty swimming pools is noteworthy. In fact, if a pool is visible, it is more likely for it to be empty and a better chance of it being full if it's hidden from the view. When in the late 60s, the master plan of Tehran was being modeled by Victor Gurin Associates after American cities like Los Angeles, the Iranian middle class shared some aspirations with its American counterparts, some of which manifestations can be found in architectural form. LA as a desert city has 1 million private pools, and Tehran with its long and hot summer days had the right climate for such facility. The domestication of water in the Iranian context, however, has a long history, as the presence of hose or a shallow pool was an inseparable part of Iranian architecture. For centuries, Iranians have centered their houses and gardens around these shallow pools, both as a symbolic and functional feature. These shallow pools were not meant to be used for bathing or swimming and served as decoration or for washing purposes. It was only with the growth of modern lifestyle in the cities in the 50s and 60s that hose became a swimming pool. The revolutionary culture of post-1979 affected many aspects of space by advocating for the religious over the secular values and the traditional over modern lifestyle. Endorsing this culture on individual level meant that the private swimming pools were subject to voyeurism and their use seen as a potential threat to the new public morale. While the reinforcement of these sentiments explain why these pools remain empty during the hot summers of Tehran, but it doesn't answer why most of these pools continue to exist after 42 years and they have not been filled with earth or converted into parking or green spaces. In a city where every inch is being filled up, what does it mean to have these voids remain intact? Perhaps like any other object that one doesn't use but keeps in the hope of using in future, the maintenance of the empty swimming pools follows the same logic. Keeping these voids not only expresses a wish for them to be filled and used in an unforeseen future, but holds on to the memory of them once full. Looking at Jordan as one of Tehran's neighborhoods, according to the municipality records, in an area of 3 kilometers, 1,100 sheikhs are labeled as private waters, representing swimming and decorative pools. When extracting these spaces, these pools, and bringing them all together, the totality of these negative spaces creates a space the size of a lake. This large container, whether empty or full, highlights a collective desire for the presence of water. While longing for water in our dry lands is not an unanticipated rediscovery, but the connection between water and the flow and working of imagination is perhaps less observed, but a strong aspect in the case of the maintenance of these empty containers of water, showing that amassed water in one form or another has been an important part of Iranian collective memory and aspirations. My investigation of these persistent voids pushed me more and more towards the latent collective longing underneath the individual appearance and gave direction to my formal experimentations. Looking for new possibilities that the integration of these negative spaces creates, I took the forms from the municipality record, giving them depth and dimension, connecting and combining them through a liquid material. When connected, the pools once again allow for the possibility of movement and flow. They attempt to create an image of a streaming water as opposed to the image of the stagnant waters accumulated in the bottom of empty swimming pools of Tehran. And I like to finish with some images from the finished works from the series Pools and Voids, which is currently on view at Raffaele Cortisi Gallery in Milan.
Thank you, Nazgol, for that presentation and for taking us through your studio space. And thank you for working through the technical issues.
I hope it wasn't too interruptive. I couldn't hear anybody, so I wasn't sure if people can hear me.
No, it was fascinating, and the video of your space, taking us through your space, was very interesting. And in looking at the different materials, you showed fragments of glass, hand-cut fragments of newspaper, all the way to models that were 3D printed. Can you talk a little bit about your choice of material? You mentioned once in an interview at some point that the choice of the technology of 3D printing was important conceptually. Could you explain that a bit more?
Sure. So when I work on a project, I don't decide what the final work is going to be made of. I start with collecting all sorts of visual material, read on the subject, and I start formal experimentations, like the images that I shared with you for the project Pools and Voids. So the experimentations I did with wax, for example, you don't see it anywhere in the final pieces, but it led me to sort of get to arrive at the point of creating those sculptures. My work often involves a mix of use of technology as well as sort of working with hand quite a lot. So it's a mix of both. Regarding the 3D prints, specifically for the project Fabrications, which I also shared with you today, Fabrications is probably one of the only works that actually I haven't done anything with hand. It's all, I mean, it has gone from working on the computer to being realized by a 3D printer. And as I mentioned, that was part of the concept. It was very important for me that these works would be jointless, that the two buildings that I was merging together, the mural and the actual building, that there would be no joints between them, so that you didn't know where one starts and the other one ends. And you could only really reach that sort of quality or sort of to realize that concept even in the making of the work was through 3D printing, where everything is sort of realized at the same time. So for that particular project, 3D printing played also a conceptual part of the work. For other projects, I sometimes use 3D printing for modeling.
So there's a sense of the choice of the technology is really to get at this virtual or imagined sort of quality or
yes.
What you're seeing in that human relationship to place.
Yes, yes, absolutely. For that project, it's very important that it's just, you imagine something and it's just like, it's then suddenly out there in the world. There's no process of making.
So when I think about where you've moved, so you went from, if I understand it correctly, you went from more of the northern part of the city or near the mountain and went further into the center of the city. And
yes.
Since your observations are so keen and close and bringing together what you see around you and creating work or somehow manifesting what you see and feel, how has that shift in geography, even within Tehran, do you sense that it has affected your work or changed it in any significant way?
Yeah, I think it has had quite a big effect, which I was also trying to explain in the tour of the house. When I was in North Tehran, I was also on the 7th floor, so I had the view of the city. In a way, I was observer of the sort of the physical changes of the city on the level of the facade of the building. So I could see that things are going up and down constantly in the I think 12, 13 years that I lived in that area. The area was, it radically changed. Moving to the center of the city, as I mentioned, I am
in a low-rise building. I mean, there aren't so many 1 or 2 story buildings left in Tehran. So basically that also means that I'm the shortest building in my area, and I basically have no view. So that really also affected the way I was, the subjects that I was interested in, especially that it also coincided with the pandemic and staying home quite a lot. Mm-hmm. So I sort of have been searching, or have been thinking quite a lot about the manifestation of a psychological state in the physical or the built environment. And so that's how I arrived at the project, the inverted pool, and later focus on the subject of the empty swimming pools, and very much focus on the sort of their relationship to a collective memory and a collective desire.
Let's step back now in thinking about your studio and this, the collective desire that really drove the way the city of Tehran evolved or modernized. It's interesting that the studio that you're in now, if I remember correctly, was built in the 1950s. Is that correct?
Yes.
So it makes me think about the interesting history of the transformation of Tehran, particularly in the 30s and 40s, where attention to building housing for the middle class was quite important, if not paramount. Yes. That expanding the city past its old walls, and the presence of these pools. Can you speak a little bit more about this legacy of the city? It's fascinating that these pools are never removed. They're never covered over. They just remain completely empty.
I mean, obviously not all of them. I mean, a lot of them, along with the buildings that, with the lots that the building was on, when the building was demolished and redeveloped, the pools are also gone. Interestingly enough, a lot of the residential complexes, that are being built in Tehran, especially in north of Tehran, also still have pools, but the pool has been moved from the garden to the basement, which is a sort of a private space. So yeah, I mean, the pools appear mostly in the sort of the villa houses of like the middle class, in more middle class neighborhoods. Like Jordan was one of the examples of these middle class neighborhoods. A lot has affected. I mean, there are various reasons for these pools that they remain empty. As I mentioned, one of them was when the sort of the buildings around you are going higher, they're being demolished and replaced by higher buildings. It means that you have more neighbors looking into your space, and you don't feel that you have the privacy that you had before, where everybody was sort of had like a 1 or 2 level houses. But also, as I was discussing, with the history of the importance of water and its preservation and its presence in Iranian architecture, the pools also they sort of have perhaps a sacred place in the minds of the owners or of the house, because even if they're empty, most of them still have like a blue color, and they're reminiscent of water. So even for that reason, perhaps they're kept, because they are supposedly a representation of something beautiful and desired.
to pick up on a comment you just made about visibility, the sort of neighbors and the voyeurism, these shifts, as happens in many cities, these shifts from the lower scale, from the interior courtyard to smaller spaces, apartments, residences stacked on top of each other. How would you say that that has affected the sense of public and private, of interaction with the street, for example, or interactions with each other? How do you feel that? Have you felt a sense, a shift, and how would you express it?
I mean, I have an experience. I would say this shift, apart from sort of buildings getting higher and people living on top of each other, it's also a shift that has come with, the revolution, the sort of the post-revolution sentiments. I personally haven't experienced what it was before I was born at that very year, but it's the public and private space is very, very clearly divided in the Iranian context. So when we're speaking about the use of something like a swimming pool, that's really it's sensed very highly, more than anything else, that you need your privacy in order to use a swimming pool. So yeah, I mean, which is, I mean, another interesting perhaps shift in architecture, that when we went from these courtyard houses where everything sort of centered towards the life happened in a closed space, and everything opened into a sort of a courtyard in the middle. With modernization, the architecture changed and sort of allowed for the public and private to mix a little bit more. But again, with the Iranian Revolution, there was a need for maintaining private spaces. So that was something I actually felt very or observed very clearly when I was house hunting and went inside different people's houses. I could see even in the morning that all of the curtains were drawn. So that there is this sense that people want to keep their private life private. Yeah.
It's fitting to be thinking about how we shape our interior spaces. For you, it's really, you've worked out, you've designed your own system for living and working in this structure. Particularly during these times, it makes me wonder about the way, if we're rethinking the way that a city can evolve. For Tehran, climate change, the pollution that affects the denser parts of the city, and also the way that we've changed our human interaction, or we're in the process of rethinking human interaction. Do you think that will affect the pace of construction and destruction in Tehran? Is there a more public discussion about how architecture and city planning should proceed after a particularly difficult year?
Not that I have been aware of.
Yeah.
No, unfortunately not. I mean, economy has, especially in the last year. I mean, with the economic situation, investing in property is perhaps one of the most profitable and also stable ways of
keeping your money safe. So that is really, it's the first, it seems to be the first priority at the moment. I don't see that. I mean, Tehran is sort of going into the direction of more and more sort of green spaces, gardens being demolished and replaced by, as they like to say, luxury sort of buildings these days. So unfortunately, that's the sentiment that I feel. I'm sure there are discussions, but if it's going to be whether or not implanted, I don't know.
Now, I want to, for this last question, before we turn to any public questions, I'd like to return to your work. Are you, your earlier work dealt a lot with sort of mundane objects, newspapers, plates, chairs, more maybe in the vein of looking at the traces of activities and reconfiguring them. And more recently, a lot more of the 3D printing, of the architectural recreating of spaces. Perhaps in the past year, your interaction with other interior spaces has been limited or restricted. Where do you see the next phase of your work? Have you been shifting your focus back to objects, or how do you see the next phase of your work? Since I imagine you haven't been able to do site-specific exhibitions much or plan for many as you would have in the past. So maybe, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's an interesting question. I mean, as you say, I sort of went from, let's say, domestic to urban, then perhaps sort of coming back to domestic. Actually, when I was preparing the video in order to find the examples of the houses, I mean, I didn't photograph any of the houses. I went in because there were private spaces. So I was looking at ads for rents or selling houses, and I came across those photos of people's private spaces. And I thought, oh, this is really fascinating. I mean, to see how there was this, you can say, almost like a unified way of living in terms of the choice of furniture, the lights, and all of that, which I thought was interesting. I thought, oh, this is there was like a little spark in my head. But for the moment, I think I'm going to continue to work on pulls and voids for a little bit more. I would like to explore some other aspects of it. But I think in the back of my head, that is also sort of something is cooking for the next project.
I'm going to, thank you. I'm going to turn to some questions here. We have one that picks up on your observation about the murals that have been, that are predominant now in the city. Are the murals decided by the municipality? The merging of the past and the modern is fascinating. Can you speak a little bit more? The history of the mural, even in the last few decades, certainly from the 90s forward, has changed quite a bit. No?
Yes. This is actually one of the things that I find the most interesting about murals is that they're changing every couple of years. So the murals that they sort of like the the mix of past and present, and also this sort of play with illusion of space is almost becoming sort of old already. And interesting enough, 3 of the murals that I worked on to make the models are already gone and replaced with something new. So the murals sort of, they are done by municipalities. Sometimes some of them are done by other governmental organizations, but most of them are commissioned by
a unit in a municipality called the Beautification. So their aim is to make the city more beautiful. So these murals, the ones that I focus on, are already it's from 6-7 years ago, and they sort of in a way coincided with the with this sort of building and construction boom, and they seem like in a way a compensation for all the spaces that we were missing, and or to compensate for the pollution. So you always, most of the days, you have this gray sky, but in the murals you have this like blue, idealistic skies. So the murals initially started mostly with image of the martyrs from the Iran-Iraq war, and then slowly shifted to sort of more images of nature, then this sort of mix of past and present. You can say nowadays most of them have become, you can say, sort of neutral. They're kind of these almost like floral patterns. They're not really a representation of anything. It's like as if we're sort of in a state of limbo. Let's decide what will come next. For now, let's just have like a pattern.
That's fascinating that the murals are changing yet again. Yes. One question here is that relates to the social aspect of demolishing the old buildings in society and their interaction and living style. You purchased a building and renovated it and have pretty much stayed within the footprint, right? You haven't gone taller. Is there, in thinking of the social aspect of demolishing, I would be interested to know if there is a significant enough movement of individuals like yourself that are trying to retain or rehabilitate some of these more, not the grand structures, the monumental ones perhaps, or institutional ones, but more of those individual homes or spaces. Is there that sensibility growing?
Yes, absolutely. In the past, I would say 6-7 years, there's been sort of a move back to the center of the city, because center of the city is very much, it's mostly like office and commercial spaces. There is obviously like residential areas as well, but it's busy. It's there's a like a traffic zone where you need an enter to permit with the car. So it's not, let's say, the most desired area to live in. But there has been a move, especially with by, let's say, artists or people who are active in the cultural fields, and a lot of galleries who've moved from various parts of Tehran to the center of the city. And as a result, quite a lot of these buildings have been either purchased or renovated, rented. So yeah, there's been this move towards the center.
Like the Argo factory also, isn't that, I haven't visited it, of course, but there was a keeping the old factory space to a certain extent, and the architecture then made to work as an exhibition space. Am I correct?
Yes, absolutely. Argo specific, I mean, it was in a ruin, and they've done a really fantastic job renovating it, and as you say, also keeping the integrity of the factory, the beer factory that it was.
Is your inverted pool still there? Was it a permanent installation or a temporary one?
No, it's already demolished. No, it was there for I think 10 months, because we also had to like close the show a couple of times because of the pandemic and various reasons. But so I think it was there for 10 months or maybe a little bit more.
In a sense, demolishing is pretty integral to your practice. You have no storage space, so you realize a lot of large-scale works in situ, document it well, I hope, and then destroy them.
Well, actually, the inverted pool is the only one. Everything else is. I have membrane, which is a kind of a monumental work, but it's made out of paper, so it's possible to sort of fold it in half and store it. I don't store it myself, but inverted pool is actually the only work that has been destroyed. Fortunately, everything else has been kept.
I will, let me turn to another question here. Will you be focusing in the future on the impact of modernization that has sort of resulted in the elimination of parks or green spaces and living in small space apartments? We sort of address that a little bit, this sort of change in private and public space, but the elimination of green spaces is a problem in, or the control and management and creation of green spaces seems to be at various stages in different cities throughout the world. How is it in Tehran? What is the impact of this shift in?
Well, I mean, it has a huge impact in the city. I mean, the quality of air for sure. All of these sort of desirable areas of Tehran, which were, I mean, Tehran was a garden city at originally, but what is left of these gardens are also being sort of replaced by high rises. I mean, the municipality is active in creating green spaces, but most of these green spaces are actually being developed around the highways. So as you drive from north to south, or you cross all of these very beautiful green spaces, but you don't have any access to them, which I think is an interesting subject on its own, that the green spaces are for you to look at as you're driving, but not to really use.
It's rather like the murals. The murals are this sort of skin of a kind of aesthetic with blue skies and maybe some green spaces in a different environment, but never to be accessed really. You can't. So the green spaces are being created in the same way.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Let's see, we have one more question here. Germany, I heard, keeps old bricks by city rule and must reuse them. Okay, so is there a direction like that in Tehran? Are there rules around destruction and reconstruction? I know there's a lot of demolition is a business, I imagine. Yeah. There's a lot of recuperating of materials, but is it done in a considered way, or just as a consumer consumption?
No, it's not. I mean, I don't think so. I mean, what is salvaged is the material that is valuable in terms of, let's say, the metal. Like all the metal is salvaged because then they resell it. But no, I don't think there is. In general, I mean, things that are old are not necessarily looked at as valuable here. I had so many of my neighbors ask me why I'm renovating this house instead of like demolishing and building an apartment. So yeah, unfortunately, I mean, there are mixed feelings. I think people do enjoy, at the end of the day, they enjoy going to the palaces and some older parts of the city, but at the same time, again, economy is a big force behind all of this. So if it's not worth, let's say, brick is not worth salvaging.
Right. Last question. What is next for the pools? The inverted pool was just recently brought down or deinstalled. What are you looking forward to next in that project?
I'm actually, I think that the next step of the project, so the pools and voids, I would say it's a different, it does focus on the idea of pools or empty pool. I see it as a different project than inverted pool. So after, the pieces that I've presented currently in Milan, the idea of the collection of the pools and them making a lake, all the collection really fascinates me. So I think I'm interested in perhaps creating something focused on that subject of bringing all of the spaces, all of these negative spaces, to create one big space, one big void, actually.
Well, I look forward to seeing how the project progresses. I know that once you focus on one subject, you really go far and go deep for a while. So again, I look forward to seeing how that evolves. Thank you, Nazgol, and happy Nowruz. The fireworks are booming still on your end.
Yes, they are. They're getting louder.
Yeah, as the night goes on. Good luck. And thank you to our audience who tuned in. I'd also like to thank our team at the Freer and Sackler for making this happen. Please stay in touch and check the studio, our virtual space for contemporary art programs. Next month, we will have a program with a chat with Vivan Sundaram in India. So again, check the site for details, and thank you for being here. Good night, everyone. Good day, good afternoon, good morning from wherever you are.
Thank you. Bye.